I'm really excited to be here with you as someone who's worked in education. And I wanted to jump right in and ask you, how was it that you got started in education? Bring me back to the beginning, how you decided to go into the field.
That's a really good question. So hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I got started in education because since I was young, I was always starting stuff. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that I was a social entrepreneur at that time because I just didn't know what an entrepreneur was, yet alone a social entrepreneur. Right. But I started like a program to recycle in my elementary school when I was like 8, and then a youth center when I was 11, which my mom was the director of the board for like 25 years. Merci, maman. C'est à la maison et que tu écoutes. And then I wanted to do theater, and then I studied dance in Cégep, which is a thing we have here in Quebec, really fun. You can do all sorts of things. So I studied dance, and then I did a international development program, which was more kind of a community exchange program in Guatemala in 1999. And that's where I actually learned that the world was unfair and that I was taking advantage as a white woman living in the north of a lot of that. So it kind of like completely transformed my world, as I think if anybody here did the Québec sans frontières, you know what I'm talking about. So then I just realized, oh my God, like I have to contribute. I need to do something. I need to change the world. Like that thing, you know, when you're 18 and you realize that the world is unfair. Right. So I was thinking, should I go into like maybe journalism so I can reach a lot of people, or politics? Mm-hmm. And then I was thinking, or maybe education is a place where I should be, because if I was thinking about teaching what we call here moral, like morals. So it's kind of philosophy. And you have a lot of students when you teach philosophy in high school. So it's about like 250 students a year. Wow. So I was thinking like very mathematically, like if I touch with values of compassion and solidarity, 250 students a year for 30 years, and they go on and they touch like that amount of people in their life, like I think that's where I could have the biggest impact in changing the world. Yeah. So that's how I got interested in education. But then once I came back to education, I was like, oh, wow, that's how we teach our kids. Like that's what education is having people sitting down for 18 years listening to what other people think they should be interested in. Like that doesn't make any sense. So then I become an activist in the education system.
Right. So, yeah, talk to me a little bit more about the steps between becoming an activist and getting in. You went to university here in Montreal, right? And when you graduated, did you have that feeling right away, or is that something that developed with time and experience?
That's an interesting question. I think it really started happening when I was doing my student internships, my student teacher program. I don't know how you say it in English. Internships, we say it in French. Yeah. And I was just there in front of the class, and I had to be the person saying like, Roland, enlève ta casquette, like remove your hat. Like, why, madame? Because you cannot wear your hat here. But I don't understand. Just because it's the rule. Madame, what will be on the test? Well, that thing, but tomorrow we'll talk about like civil disobedience. Oh, yeah, but today we have to talk about this thing because we have a test on that. So I like was that person that needed to teach something that even I didn't believe in. So it really kind of like disturbed me as a human being. And I was kind of an anarchist when I was young, and I had forgotten about that. And I was like, oh my God, I remember why now. This is like so boring. So that's when it really happened. But then I had a professor in my philosophy of education class, which nobody cared for, about like me and another student. And he asked to a point like, who here would be interested in starting their own school? Cool. And I was like, wow, that's a great idea. I didn't even know you could start a school. You know, I didn't even know you could be an entrepreneur in education. Like it was like you studied, anybody here studied education? Like you study to become a teacher. You know, you don't study to become a professional educator in whichever context. No. So that was the start of like, okay, I could be an entrepreneur in education. Cool. And so then the next step, correct me if I'm wrong, was onto Harvard of all places. That's pretty awesome. And what did you study at Harvard? So I ended up in Harvard because I wanted to start a school, and so I just started looking for programs to learn how to build a school. Well, it doesn't really exist. I mean, not that I knew at that time,
Right.
but Harvard had a program called School Development.
Oh.
So I thought that was the place where all anarchists would go to study, which is a lie. Like anarchists don't go to Harvard to study.
No.
I was the only one, and yeah, but it was more like a program to help independent school principals to rethink their school. So that was what it was.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So when you got there, did you feel out of place, or did you quickly like fit in? What was it like to join that environment?
Yeah.
I'm just curious. You know, I think a
I
lot
never
of people
talk about that. It's a primeur. But I definitely felt out of place because I didn't know anything about the schooling system in the States. So, in the States, you have the independent school,
Right.
usually pretty privileged, mostly white. So I was with a lot of white, older monsieur that were principal of an
Right.
independent school.
Right.
So not exactly the anarchist type. They existed at Harvard, but in like the arts and ed program, in the tech and ed program. So I ended up by discovering them, but they were not my immediate surrounding.
Okay,
No.
got it. Yeah. And from there, correct me if I'm wrong, the next step was New York, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and podcasting. So can you tell us a little bit about that, about the podcasting? Because I wasn't able to find it. I want to know like what it was that you were podcasting on.
So I was working for a thing called Learning Matters. So it was, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was a production company that was specializing in creating education-related report for PBS. So they were covering all news on learning and education in the United States. So they were doing documentaries and reports. So I would take what was kind of left after they did their report or documentaries and create audio podcasts with kind of the leftovers of whatever they had, interviews they had shot. So it was really interesting. It was kind of in the first wave of podcasts, like before Serial.
Right,
Serial was
yeah.
kind of the second wave of podcasting.
Yeah.
And that was more like This American Life and Radio Lab that were just, not starting, but that were really popular at that time.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool. And I know that e180, your current company, came out of that experience. Can you talk about what it was in that experience that helped you develop the idea that became e180?
Yeah. I'm sorry for everybody who heard that story 1,000 times because that's the story I always tell, but that's the story where because I was a podcast producer, I was working a lot with the new kind of social media team because it was like 2007, 2008. So it was still like that thing of, okay, social media need to be managed. It was pretty new.
Right.
And we would use, obviously, Twitter and Facebook to promote the podcast. So I was really close with that team. So I was kind of getting involved in social media pretty early on. And then I was seeing a lot of people posting these kind of like cry for helps or just when you need to learn something new and you want to pick somebody's brain. So we all do that where you post on Facebook, I'm moving to Montreal. I have no clue where to live. And there's the French thing. Will I be able to survive there? Do you know anybody who have lived in Montreal? I'll pay the beer. I would love to pick their brain.
Right.
So I was seeing a lot of people posting these kind of like demands or query on Twitter and Facebook. And I was like, wow, that's exactly how I learned everything I'm really using even as a podcast producer. My husband is a musician. I learned how to use audio software because of him and his friends. I didn't go back to sound engineering school, So I was like, wow, that's how I learned everything I'm actually using on a daily basis. So maybe there's something there. What if we created a social network where people can actually post those, cry for help and also offers of knowledge, and we can connect people so they can learn from each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's brain dating now, right? Isn't that the term?
Yeah. It was called like one-on-one knowledge sharing meetups for a while.
Cool,
and then
cool.
I went to South by Southwest. I was a speaker and I was waiting for my badge. And I told the guy so I'm doing this thing, people can, kind of create their profile online and then they can post their offers and request for knowledge, but then they meet offline to share knowledge in person. And he was like, oh, kind of like a date? I was like, yeah, kind of a date, but it's not to find the love of your life. It's really to learn something. Okay, like a brain date? And I was like, yes.
That is a great story. Yeah.
I don't know. This guy one day will contact me because I tell that story all the time. So one day he will be like, hey, where's my due? Yes.
Right.
But we trademark it. So I think we're fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that was 2000. When was South by Southwest?
So we launched E180 in 2011, and then people could do knowledge sharing, one-on-one, face-to-face, whatever, meetups in coffee shops. But the brain date terminology, I think, came in 2014.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was always the same thing. It was just called a boring thing.
I see. And were you still doing podcasting in 2011? No. Okay.
No. I did that for like a year, and then my visa was expiring.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I know how that feels.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was like, am I committing for them to sponsor me and stay there for at least 2-3 years just to, kind of contribute back?
Okay.
But I had the idea for E180, and I know there's a lot of funding here for people who want to start a business, and so I imported a husband, and we moved back here.
Imported a husband.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good one.
Take me through the steps. I'm really curious. So that's 2009. You returned to Montreal.
2008.
2008. Okay. And E180 launched in 2011. That's a couple years, and I think there are some of us at Le Wagon, and maybe in the audience, and maybe watching on Facebook, who have their own ideas. But 3 years is a long time between idea and reality. Can you talk about those early times and what it was like to try and make that into a reality? Because I think a lot of people want to know.
You have a really good questions. Yeah, I don't have those questions a lot, so I don't have my prepared answer. So it was really interesting. So when I had the idea, I came back, but I was not a tech entrepreneur. I always say that technology for me was just a way to scale something that we were doing with Excel sheets and boards and chalk, chalk. And so just like becoming a tech entrepreneur, understanding how you build technology, like finding somebody. I was not, and I'm still not a developer, so finding the right person. There's all these people in the world that have a great idea looking for a tech co-founder. I was one of them. So like finding that tech co-founder, and then the whole tech startup scene, like very VC driven, pretty boys club, and I didn't really identify with that, but I didn't understand why. And then I discovered social entrepreneurship, and I was like, oh, this is a bit more me. Okay. But then there was the ed tech thing, and I'm like, but I don't want to work in schools and give them iPads, which a lot of ed tech was at that point. Just like, oh, give the kids a bunch of iPads, and then they'll learn better. So it kind of took all of that to say that it took me a good amount of time just to define myself as an entrepreneur and define the project and the revenue model. So to a point, I just ran out of money. Like I was thinking and spending money on like rent and then no revenue. So I got a job at INM, Institut du Nouveau Monde, for the Montréalais ici. And that was actually pretty an important step in my entrepreneurship journey, because I could kind of rebuild the financial and mental health by meeting human beings and not being alone in my house thinking about this idea, and like making money, learning, prototyping some of the ideas that became E180. Okay. So sometimes like taking a job as an entrepreneur is the best thing you can do, to learn and to like get back your financial ground as well. So that was for me really pivotal in my journey. And then we started prototyping what we call the knowledge markets. So we would do that thing with a theme, so like social entrepreneurship, and then have 4 chalk boards, and we would take people's offers and requests and write that down on the sub team, and then pair people for brain dates. Okay, so that was kind of the early prototype stage of that idea of knowledge sharing around certain topics.
Got it.
Yeah.
And actually, I want to back up for a second. For those who are less familiar with social entrepreneurship, what is that as opposed to regular entrepreneurship, or you mentioned the EdTech community as well? Just to help us understand what that means a little bit more, if you don't mind.
Yep. There's different definitions of social entrepreneurship. I think the most common one is an entrepreneur that uses the kind of leverage and tools of business to create systemic changes. So that I think is the most common definition. The way I see it for me as an entrepreneur is the idea that revenues and profit propel impact and my social mission. So profit for profit or revenues for revenues is not what I aim to do with my life as a human and as an entrepreneur. Right. For me, making money is extremely important because it's the blood of my business, and my business is my vehicle to changing the way people learn throughout the world. So that's how I see and think about entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. All right. So 2011, E180 is born.
Yes.
And those first couple of years with E180, people are meeting in coffee shops. They're doing their brain dates there. But there was a turning point, right, at which you started to shift your approach to brain dates as a whole. And that was with the C2 conference. Can I know it's a very common story, but would you mind telling us so we have some context?
Who doesn't know that story?
Maybe a lot of people, actually. So
Perfect.
to be fair, yeah.
Perfect. So I haven't told it as much as I thought. So basically, we have this site. People can post offers and requests for knowledge. You can browse the offers and requests for knowledge, and then you find somebody that you're interested in meeting. You book a meeting with them, which is now a brain date, and then you go in a coffee shop and you either share your knowledge or receive knowledge, and obviously enter into like a meaningful conversation with that stranger. Right. So that's the genesis of the project, and it's still where we're going with it. But then the problem of revenue is a problem. The other problem is the problem of commitment. So when I have a daughter, and on Thursday night, I want to go see my daughter. Like going on a brain date with a random lady that I don't know, she might or might not show up. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she's not as interested as I hope she would be. I have to travel to that coffee shop. Maybe she'll be late. Like the perceived risk of going on a brain date on a Thursday night is pretty high, actually, in terms of ROI on your hour,
Right.
And then when C2 Montreal approached us, they asked us, everybody knows C2 Montreal, it's a big creative conference in Montreal, like about 4,000 people coming from all over the world to talk about business and creativity. So they had one edition. They asked us for the second edition if we could do their B2B platform. And I said, well, we don't do B2B, we do knowledge sharing and peer learning. And they were like, wow, you're a bunch of hippies. Like we have CEOs and CMOs that are coming to this conference. Like they won't relate to this thing at all. And we're like, well, we all need to learn. And we, as innovators, we all learn from people around us because, school and programs haven't catched up yet to what we need to learn. So we exchange best practices. So that's what we do. Right. And they were like, okay, that's convincing. So we tried out brain dates, and it actually really took off. Like the first year we had 1,000 in 3 days, and this year we had like over 3,000 brain dates. So that made us realize that not only we could generate revenues by engaging with big major conferences and events, because usually the person sitting next to you is as interesting as the person on stage at that level. And then we're like, what's also interesting is that people are very committed to learning and meeting great people. When you travel, thousands of miles to go to the other side of the world for a conference, you don't want to just be sitting in a dark room listening to that lady on stage. You actually want to mingle with the other attendees, but there's no way to really meaningfully engage in
facilitate that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's based on serendipity, basically, which is not very efficient when you have 7,000 people all interested in creativity.
Right.
So we really found a niche that was good for revenues, but also good for impact when you think that we generate, 500, 1,000, 2,000 brain dates in 2-3 days.
Yeah, it goes back to that math you were talking
about. Exactly. All about math.
Cool. Awesome. And now...
Does that make sense? Did I lose you? Everybody's there? Perfect.
Yeah. And so now your primary revenue comes from conferences, but you're continuing to expand brain dates. And I actually read that E180 operates in 70 countries on the website. What is it, in what capacity?
I think that's misleading. I don't know. It's funny because another person told me that today, and I'm like, I need to change that wherever you found that because it's not true anymore. Just in the sense that when we had our open brain date platform, when it was open to the public, yes, we had probably members in 70 countries, but we didn't have 70 countries that were active.
Right, got it.
And now we have clients in, I would say, about 10 countries, like a lot in the States, in Europe, starting in Asia a little bit. But we closed the public platform in May, so the one-on-one, just because the numbers were not there, and because we decided not to go for VC money to be independent and mission-driven, we need to allocate the resources really thoughtfully. Like we need to be really thoughtful about the way we invest our human resources and financial resources. So we closed the public platform, but we're reopening it to foster, to basically help any community leader that would be interested in hosting their own brain date event on a Thursday night, so that they have the tools they need to gather their community to foster an evening of brain dates on any given topic.
Right.
So that we're really excited about going back to communities and offering that.
Cool. And just out of curiosity, why Thursday night? Sorry, that's been on my mind for a while now.
It's a really good question. It could be Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Maybe not Saturday.
Saturday.
Who wants to brain date on a Saturday night?
You want to chill out on Saturday,
maybe.
right? Yeah.
Maybe if it's about drinks or I don't know.
Yeah, cool. All right. Now, I think bringing it back to entrepreneurship as a concept, I think in my experience, there are a lot of people who kind of stumble into entrepreneurship from somewhere else, and that sounds like a little bit like your story. And then there are people who know from the college level that that's what they want to do. For those of us who stumbled into it, or kind of walked into it from somewhere else, what would you say are some tips you have? I mean, I think we can draw some of it out from what you've said, but what are some top tips if you realize, hey, maybe I want to be an entrepreneur? What are things that you should be thinking about and holding on to as you go through that process?
It's a really good question. I think it's kind of, I don't know how to say that, but I think that people who studied are interested in something else rather than being interested in entrepreneurship have an advantage because you have a passion. You're passionate about something. You know something deeply. You care deeply about something. You know the challenges that this field is facing, so you can propose a solution and answer. You know, you can propose something new to a conversation is already dear to your heart. Whereas I think when you want to be an entrepreneur, but you don't have an idea that is powerful enough that it will, you know, sustain you and your motivation for 5, 10, 15 years, I think it's more difficult. You know, I know a lot of people are like, I want to start a business, but I don't know what. Whereas when you are just very passionate about something and you're like, this that needs to be fixed and nobody's taking care of that, I'm going to do it. You become an entrepreneur.
Right.
You know, and you can do it in other ways. You can be an employee in a company that is very close to your values and where you can be paid to, you know, to solve a problem. But if you feel that that opportunity is not there, that's when you create a business. So all of that to say that I think for people who didn't know, never thought they would be entrepreneurs, I think that if you can deal with the risk and the uncertainty of being an entrepreneur, but that you're very passionate about something you want to fix or something you want to contribute to the world, I think you're in a really good position.
Right. And yeah, you talk about the risk and uncertainty. Were there particular moments in your journey that were particularly uncertain, and how did you deal with them? Because I think from personal experience in China, where I've lived and worked for the past 2 years, I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who just can't handle that risk and uncertainty. So what kind of moments did you have, and how did you deal with them?
Well, yesterday and the day before yesterday and last week, it never stops. And I think that the financial uncertainty for me is the most difficult one, especially when you start having employees and. You know, it's like you have to pay people. It's not just me who won't have a paycheck. You know, it's like now 20 people if we cannot make the revenues, you know, so that's always a big thing. But I think the big shifting moment for any entrepreneur is when you have a team that supports you and all that. You know, I have a financial, like a CFO now, I have a COO, I have people around me to see those things coming and work with me on finding solutions, like the biggest, challenges. So, and then it's just accepting that things are never perfect and that it's constantly like being an entrepreneur. What you need to learn is to learn to be okay with the fact that things are not perfect and things are uncertain, and something came at you, you never saw it coming, and you took it right in your face. You know, like that happens constantly, and it's just about like. And keep on going and learning from these things.
Right.
I know it's like things that everybody says, but I think it's true for me.
So do you think it's that idea, that underlying idea that you have, or that passion you have, is what keeps you going most?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely that, and the people around you. I mean, I'm sure for other entrepreneurs here, it's different, but, you know, being convinced, like I always think if I was to stop, when it's hard, I'm like, okay, so what are you going to do? You're going to stop this, and tomorrow what are you going to do? Rebuild the same thing, because that's what I need to do. That's what I want to do. That's what I need to achieve in my life, is to tackle this thing called the education system that doesn't make any sense, you know? So even if si je me plante, I'm still there tomorrow morning with the same need of doing something about that thing. So, and then the family, you know, like just being surrounded and being supported and having people who understand what you're going through and care, and it's very important. So that's why it's so important for entrepreneurs to take care also of their family, you know, and not work those like 90 hours a week, because then you're fucking alone with your problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that before, and it doesn't work very well. No. Cool. So actually, I want to talk about maybe a source of support for you, because I'm aware that e180 is a BCorp, And I think that's really cool. Can you talk a little bit about the process of becoming a B Corp and what value it's added?
I'm super happy you're saying that. So B Corp is basically a kind of an, I don't know how you say it in English, like ISO, is that the way you pronounce it? Like a certification?
Oh yeah, there you go.
So it's a certification where you go through an assessment, which is actually really how do you say, formative? Yeah, formative. Where in going through the assessment of your practices in terms of environments, in terms of leadership, in terms of education, in terms of how you choose your service providers, your relationships with your community, just by going through this assessment of like 300 questions, it really is really humbling. You know, wow, like some people like care about all these things, that it's amazing. And then basically to be certified, you need to have a certain score in the assessment. And then you become a certified B Corp, but then you have your assessment that is kind of a menu for the rest of your life of things you could improve to actually, and I didn't answer your question, but to actually, B Corp stands for business for good. So it's the idea that a benefit corporation, you can be a corporation, but actually leverage business as a force for changing, again, like changing whatever you think should be changed in the world. So yeah, we're a B Corp.
Yeah.
And I really encourage anybody to become a B Corp, and I can talk about that with anybody here interested.
Yeah, no, there'll definitely be some opportunities for that. And a little bit more about B Corp. My understanding is once you're a B Corp, it makes doing business with other B Corps a lot smoother. Is that true? And have you had any experience with that?
You know, it's a good question. We're recently certified, and I feel that it's still something that you need to, how can I say, to be very intentional about. You know, like we're a women-owned business.
Okay.
And do I really like keep an eye out for service provider that are women to support women-led businesses, for instance? No. You know, but I happen to have a lot of service providers that are women.
Okay.
But am I intentional about that? Not really. You know, so it's the same thing I think for B Corp, where you have a repertory. I could go and look, and we don't really do that. Right. So it still takes that will and that intention of being, again, like very intentional about the way you choose your service provider or you achieve, you know, your operations.
Right. No, that makes sense. I only asked because I was at a B Corp meetup in Beijing,
Nice.
and we heard that Ben & Jerry's had partnered with a random brewery that was also B Corp, and they made ice cream together.
Awesome.
Beer ice cream. So I guess the potential's out there.
What was it called?
I don't know the name, but
It's always the best part of the ice cream.
Yeah.
Ice cream.
But you know that partnership potential exists because it smooths out the process. But cool.
I'll look into it more. You just like reminded me that I should do that.
Yeah, well, it's just an idea. But I think I don't know where we are on time. I kind of lost track.
Yeah, we could open it maybe for questions.
But yeah, I just have one last one for you.
No problem.
And that's that. How do you see E180 continuing to influence the educational system over the next 5-10 years? What's your vision for the future?
So there's big things coming up. So opening the Brain Jam platform so anybody can organize events where their community can share knowledge is the next big step. Writing a first book also on self-directed, collaborative, experiential learning. And something I'm super excited about is we're actually going back to my will of starting a school. So we're starting a school. We're working now on starting a first school in 2020, probably. 20. And then creating a foundation where we can actually support any human being who would be interested in starting a school where meaningful learning happens. So that's the future, changing every school.
Cool.
All the ones that don't support kids' happiness and adults' happiness.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And thank you again for everyone for coming and on Facebook. And let's grab a beer and chat. All right.
Thank you, everybody.